I've got a question for you. Do you think of yourself as spiritual? Have you ever had a spiritual experience? Or are you more like me and my family and have an unnatural distrust of and take personal offence to alternative health practices, let alone spirituality? It's funny, but it's just not something that my family has ever really explored or taken an interest in. And yet, I like to think of myself as a spiritual person. So what does that even mean? And in the context of your wedding, and in particular your ceremony, how can you express those beliefs, your beliefs, in a way that aligns with how you're most at ease? And if you've come from a similar background to me, doesn't feel too woo-woo for you, and doesn't necessarily refer to a particular religion as such. If you are religious and devout in your worship beliefs and practices, then your ceremony may have a more defined structure and path. But if you don't identify as religious, but want to explore what you can do to connect spiritually with your fiancé, your surroundings, your officiant or celebrant, and your friends and family, this episode is for you. Today I'm jamming with New Orleans wedding officiant Minister LaToya. Her diverse couples have been featured in Vogue and Martha Stewart Weddings and many, many others. As a wedding officiant, marriage and spiritual coach, LaToya serves couples that want personalised attention, authentic joy, a whole lot of magic, and genuine connection throughout their journey. You'll learn from LaToya about 4 opportunities to infuse your ceremony with spirituality, even if you're not religious. And she also shares her pathway to becoming an officiant, why she only takes 1 ceremony a day now, as opposed to the 4 which she's done in the past, and her pre-wedding rituals, which are a lot more practical than you might think. Let's get stuck into it. Unbridely is a community of pro-wedding vendors who believe in freedom and integrity in weddings, giving you options, solutions, tips and tricks to create the experience and memories that you and your fiancé really want and deserve. Because we believe that weddings are a team sport. With how-tos, stories and interviews with recently married couples, we find out what went right and what they'd change if they could go back and do it all over again. I'm Camille, and welcome to the Unbridely podcast.
My name's LaToya. I'm a wedding minister and spiritual and marriage coach. And I focus mostly on the wedding and marriage part. I'm in New Orleans, so a beautiful place to do those things. And I've been serving couples for about 8 years now.
That's a pretty good sign, don't you think, LaToya, when you go, I think I'm in year 8.
Yeah, I don't really count.
I feel like your milestones might be a bit different to most officiants. You seem very, very heart-led. And this is how I can, segue into talking about this post that you put up, LaToya, on Instagram, and you're talking specifically about how couples can have a spiritual but not necessarily religious ceremony. What does that look like?
I learned over the years that is what people were wanting from me, right? When you start serving, you just kind of fill into a space and hope you can figure it out along the way. And sometimes I would get very religious couples that are Christian and wanted that involved, and that was fine. But then I started to get the couples that were kind of whimsical, that were kind of heart-led, that it was way more about connection than religious practice. And that was when I realized, you have to bring your spiritual lady stuff into your wedding lady stuff, because the spiritual worker was first.
Right.
As far as my self-employed work goes, I had been doing that for roughly 12 or so years. And so that was the moment that I realized, they need both, right? So spiritual ceremonies were ceremonies that focused on the energetic connection between the couple and to everything else around them. But it didn't really highlight a specific religious practice or text.
I'm so curious though, LaToya. So the spiritual coaching came before being an officiant. I want to know what LaToya did before the spiritual coaching. I'm so curious.
LaToya is a serial entrepreneur. I've always known I'm not good at being employed, right? I am just one of those personalities. I think some people just are. And so I've always looked for a way to sustain myself rather than have a job. And I made dream catchers and I sold my handwriting at one point. I had a jewelry boutique. I did all the things. But the things that lasted or the things that stood the most in my work were I owned a spiritual wares store and boutique where I sold like sage and crystals and jewelry. And so I did that for a while. And a friend had mentioned like, oh, well, you're so good at talking. Like, why don't you do weddings? And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Right. And
Yeah.
at the time, all couples couldn't get married. This was before the same-sex law passed here in the US. And so that made me uncomfortable. I was like, I'm married to a woman. We have kids. Like, how can I celebrate weddings and they're not legal where I live? So I just kind of put that on the back burner. I got my like ordination, but I didn't do anything with it. Then the law changed like just a few months later.
Can I ask what year that was, LaToya?
2015. And so I put it on my website, but it was on my like spiritual boutique website, you know, like you could get crystals or a tarot reading or a wedding. It was kind of haphazard, but you know, we were doing what we could do. And my first year I did one wedding. And I was like, okay, well, that was cool. You know, I don't think I'd put a lot of energy into getting better or figuring out what the standard was. I was just kind of winging it. Then my wife got laid off from work at the end of that first year. And she was just really upset. She was working in education. And I said, well, just don't go back to work until you can figure out what you want to do. And she was just like, well, who's paying the bills? You know, what are we going to do about that? You know, and I was like, I'm going to figure it out. So I took my ordination out of the drawer, I hung it on the wall, and I started giving it some energy. You know, I was just like, all right, I have this thing. I'm going to start talking about it. I made it its own website. I'm not going to lie. I put up some fake reviews on my website. They were not real.
They were glowing
They
reviews.
were good. They were. And then I started getting calls and I said, all right, I have a goal of 50 weddings. If I can do 50 weddings this year, I'll think that this is a real thing. So I did 75 weddings that year. And of course, the reviews went from being fake to being real, right? So then I was on Wedding Wire and The Knot and all those types of websites with real reviews at that point. And the next year I went from 75 to 120.
Mate.
By the third year, I was just like, okay, well, I'm having to say no a lot. And then that's when I started realizing like, okay, now you need a standard. Like you were just doing this before, you know? So my third year, I kind of carved out language and what it looked like to officiate for me, more kind of whimsical, you know. At the time I had my cheeks pierced. So I was this like Black girl with locks and cheek piercings and tattoos and, you know, like, what are you doing in the wedding industry?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Yeah. But people didn't want to talk to me. You know, they still kind of looked at me, especially like other wedding vendors.
Oh, of course.
You know, and then I hired some other officiants. There were 4 of us. We did just under 200 weddings. And that was too much. So I released all of the associates and just focused on myself. That was the shift year for business because I paid a professional website designer. I started getting professional photos back. So I do about 50 weddings a year now. And I don't miss a thing. You know, I prefer it this way. I realize it allows me to have thoughts like, what does a spiritual wedding look like for a couple, to talk to them and hold their hand through the entire process. At one point in my career, I realized by the end of the year, I didn't know which way was left and right with a couple. And so that was a little too much for me. I'm quite happier where I am now.
And that's a really interesting point as well, LaToya, about that sweet spot in your workflow itself. So then you can give your very best to the couples. And I guess that's sort of something, you know, if you sit down with a couple and they're trying to work out if they want to hire you, you know, book you in, it's not commonly one of the things they say. Do you have enough time for us? You know, how invested are you going to be?
Which they really should, honestly. You know,
the time and the attention and, you know, knowing their names and knowing what their dog's called. And it doesn't come without that time.
It doesn't. And those, I don't people realize how important those things are until they important those things are. And at that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, listen, I'm higher here in America than a lot of officiants. Everybody's price range is different, but and I'm going to be in about 10% of your pictures. right? Do you want to those pictures and see a person that you actually felt cared about what they were saying and doing with you, or you just someone's name you won't even remember? I hear so many after a wedding that they've attended of mine and they're like, I wish you existed when I got married. I don't even know the person's name that married me. And now you're making me feel like I should have known their name. You should have. This person is in the middle of all of your pictures. Very happy and fortunate that when couples find me, they found me because they wanted the extra attention and they knew it was important. And they were like, no, we saw that you would give it to us. And the ceremony is one of the most important parts. My people find me either way.
That's so brilliant, LaToya. I'm so glad I asked you that because I feel like personally satisfied that I know your background now. So that's really nice.
Yeah.
The biggest misconception. What do you think that couples just don't understand about having a spiritual wedding ceremony?
A wedding ceremony does not have to have religion in it at all. I think that is the biggest misconception, is that when we say spiritual, I just mean connected. I have found that a lot of couples want comfort and not cheekiness. They are looking to be able to breathe and laugh, but they don't want their ceremony to be a joke. I want it to feel like I stepped into a moment that's changing my life. And that's where the spiritual part comes, because that's an energy thing. You don't need the Bible or any other, religious text to do that.
How do you ground yourself before a ceremony, LaToya?
While I'm getting dressed, I'm dancing. That's kind of the first thing.
There I was. I'm thinking you were all solemn. You got sage.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. People think I'm very practical in my magic. It's real life. Another reason why my pricing is what it is. I used to do 4 ceremonies a day sometimes, which is bananas. I'd have I'd have an elopement at 11 and then a big ceremony at 1 and then another elopement at 3 and then another big ceremony at 6. I had many days like that pre-COVID,
Wow.
But I realized by the end of the day, I couldn't even go back and connect with each moment I spent. The couples were happy because I performed well, but I actually wasn't there holding much space for y'all, So I only take 1 wedding a day. My days are isolated. When I have a wedding, I don't do anything. I'm not arguing with my kids. I'm not making breakfast. I have to focus, have to be prepared for what I'm going to do. While I get dressed, I'm dancing, I'm laughing, I'm, doing my hair and makeup. And so preparation starts before I get to the wedding. That's the first part. So that when I arrive, I'm comfortable, I'm calm. A lot of the times I don't drive myself. I hate driving. So I'll either Uber, get a driver, or have my wife drive me. And that also makes sure that I arrive calm. And then from the moment that I arrive, I'm ready to connect with people. But then energy wise, pre-ceremony, it really is just deep breathing. I pray. So it's prayer while we're preparing to go to the altar space. Some couples do choose to have their altar blessed before we go to it. So sometimes I'm doing that. I think that people would be surprised, just like you mentioned, that it's not this big smoke blessing before I get myself prepared. It's dancing and laughter. It's making sure that I'm calm, that I am prepared to hold the space, because couples don't, again, something that they don't know until they know. It's a lot of energy to stand up there. The moment you get up there, you're crying just because this moment is so huge in your heart. Where do you think all that energy goes? It's circling around us. And so making sure that I'm able to hold on to that, be present enough to tell them, face each other, breathe, hold hand. And at the altar, we're talking. Are you ready? Okay. You can touch each other. I had a bride once break out in hives, full hives from shoulder to shoulder, all the way down. And she looked at me and she's like, I'm so sorry. Well, you're apologizing to me. I was like, hey, I'm fine. You want to take a minute? And she said, can we take a minute? Yes, we can take a minute. And so she messaged me later and just was like, I didn't think that I could relax until you started telling me I could relax.
It's giving them permission, literally, isn't it?
My job is to make sure that I arrive empty so that I can hold everything that is going to happen.
Yes, yes. You still haven't written your vows yet, have you? Let me help. In around 20 minutes or so, you can easily write personalized wedding vows unlike anything you've heard before. that will make your fiancé feel like the most loved, understood, and appreciated person on the planet. The How to Write Wedding Vows That Don't Suck instant download 17-page PDF ebook walks you through a step-by-step format for your vows, how to find the right words and phrases to describe your feelings and your fiancé, how to write that crucial first draft, and create your final wedding vows masterpiece. So if you don't know how or even where to start, if you've been Googling your little heart out, or if you've been calling them wedding vows, AEIOU, this ebook is for you. Included in there are also some bonus secrets for getting the most out of your wedding ceremony. So make sure you download your copy right now and get Write Your Wedding Vows crossed off your to-do list today. The link is in the show notes. So to bring you back, LaToya, in your Instagram post, you shared 4 different ways that engaged couples can infuse their ceremony with their beliefs and personalities while adding real meaning. And I'd love if you could expand on some of those approaches with some examples. So the first way that you mentioned was adding a unity ritual. So what do you mean by unity ritual?
Unity ritual, best explanation is going to be what people are most familiar with is like the sand ceremony or the candle lighting. It's something that the couple is doing together in ritual, which is the ceremony itself, that signifies them bringing their own individual flame into this moment. But I tell couples only add them if it's going to add intimacy. As an officiant, I use unity rituals as a way to allow them to just be inside of their space together and to separate from the heaviness of being at the altar. So they get to walk over to a separate table and holding each other's hand and guiding one another to the point and talking and laughing. And it's kind of their chance to go off script, if you will, because they don't have to stand there at the front of the altar holding hands and smiling and reading vows. They just get to kind of laugh and navigate this experience together. Sometimes it's like braiding ropes or tying a knot or feeding each other a thing or hammering or planting a thing. All of these are interactions that the second they start doing something together, they fall back into the comfort of their relationship. And it's not necessarily the weight of the wedding. And so I only encourage adding unity rituals if that moment is necessary or if they care and if they really want to be able to celebrate just for a moment, just the two of them and can interact without worrying about what their guests are hearing or saying.
Oh, that's so good, LaToya. I love that point that you made. Yeah, it's only if it's of value.
Mhm.
You know, you don't just shove in a unity ritual for the sake of it.
Yeah, sometimes couples come to me and they have this idea. They're like, they've mapped out the ceremony, right? And we've got like 3 or 4 rituals and I'm listening. And then I say, well, why are you doing that one? Well, my mom or online or my friend. Well, why are you doing this one? Well, because I felt like we needed something in the middle. We don't need any of that. But they don't know. They're only seeing and reading what's online and seeing what their friends or family did. But unity rituals, if they're not intentional, if you don't care, they're arbitrary. And your guests are going to feel like they're arbitrary. And you're going to feel like they're arbitrary because you're going to feel irritated. Now I've got to walk over to this table, do this thing, get myself back. And you didn't care about any of that. So just only doing it if you actually feel called to participate in the ritual together that way.
Brilliant. Bloody love it. Okay. Your second way that you mentioned was to include a personalized blessing. So what does this mean for you? And do you have your couples write the personalized blessing? Like, how does that work?
I write the blessing. So as an energy worker, right, the spiritual lady, I can definitely write personalized blessings for couples. When working with couples, I give them a ceremony book, like a sample book of ceremonies that I've written and things that we can explore together. And there are blessings in there that they can choose from, but they can also, and I have had some couples request a more personalized blessing because I've taken time to get to know them. So I know their love story. I know their hopes and dreams for one another. Maybe we've talked a couple times after that. We've been at it for 6 months, 9 months, and they would rather me write something that is more, I guess, energetically guided or grounded for them. So I would write their blessings. If I'm giving this advice to couples that aren't working with me, I wouldn't say don't write your own blessing. If you are working with an officiant that you don't trust to write a blessing for you, then don't include a blessing. He's like, you're going to write a blessing and they're going to say it. How connected to it are you going to feel? And you spoke words over your own ceremony and that your vows, it's the same thing. So I would just say if you're working with an officiant that you don't think can hold that type of spiritual space for you, just skip the blessing or use something stationary.
Because again, it has to have a place, has to have a reason, has to have decent energy behind it.
Yeah. I always encourage couples that the wedding ceremony is not something you have to sit through to get to the reception. It is something you should be excited to attend. And so if every element that you're doing is just because, you're just going to be standing there waiting for it to end because you're ready to move on to the next thing. So my couples understand that we're at the ceremony and this is the thing we're doing and I'm excited about this. It's not just something in the middle of their day. So design your ceremony and work with someone that can design your ceremony in a way that you will be excited and emotional to be present for it rather than just a placeholder before the reception.
I love that. Yes. Okay. And then the third way that you were saying you could make your ceremony spiritual, not necessarily religious, was to use culturally relevant proverbs and wise phrases. So, yeah, do you have any examples of what you mean by that?
I only had time to grab a few, but one of them is an Irish saying about love. And it says, love is like a stirabout. It must be made fresh every day. And a stirabout is a porridge. But for an Irish American couple, that meant something because maybe they know what a stirabout is, right? Their grandmother probably made one. Their great grandparents probably made one. I've used African proverbs. We can't know who we are without celebrating where we come from. And so I use that when talking about a moment of silence with family members that have passed away and things like that. So again, adding culturally relevant proverbs is just really a Google search. It's asking an elder in your family a statement about love and infusing that into the wedding ceremony. And those things kind of tie you to your identity and connect you to your identity versus your religion.
That's really cool. And I also love the idea of going to your parents or your grandparents if they're still around and just going, yeah, getting it from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Just ask.
That's really cool because that's a little heirloom in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the fourth way, I love how I'm reminding you, LaToya, the fourth way that you mentioned that couples could have a ceremony that's more spiritual was to infuse an appreciation of nature into the script.
Yeah. That one is always fun because I get couples that want to do it a lot. Infusing nature, this one stands out in my mind very specifically because the last wedding that I did, they enjoyed a script sample of mine that referenced reminders to stand present in your love will be all around you. It will exist in playful butterflies in a beautiful garden. And it was a garden wedding. So that was, referencing our garden. It will be the warmth of the sun on a summer day. And it was hot as bananas. So again, reminder, the garden. It'll be this sweet. I said that, but then in her vows, the bride mentioned it. She added, she said, and I just want to say, when LaToya said the warmth of the sun, the clouds moved and I felt it on my body. And I felt like it was a sign from God that we are exactly where we're supposed to be. And I was so emotional because why did you just add that?
Because she was present.
Because she was present, right? And she was relaxed and she heard and connected with the words, which is what you want folks to be able to do. I have a line where it says, may your love be as vast as the ocean, as rooted as the biggest tree. So things like that, bringing nature into what you're doing, bringing in wisdom, bringing in wonder that allows you to really celebrate the connectedness of your relationship without having to root it in, God's grace or something like that, right?
I love that. And I love how your bride sort of pulled out your line, just kind of tucked it into her little vows. But that's the connectedness. That's so cool.
I was so moved when I realized that she'd stopped reading and was just like, and then when LaToya said, but she was present, we had a spiritual ceremony that you felt your heart and body connected to what I was saying at that moment. That's the exact goal.
Because it's one thing to get them married, LaToya, It's another to give them a memory for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
That, every time they feel the sun on their body, they will remember that moment. They will remember each other. It's
Yes. Isn't that
such
exciting?
a gift.
Isn't that so exciting? And I feel like that your officiant is a part of the memory of your wedding day forever. And you're either going to say, oh, I don't remember his name, but he was really sweet. Or you're going to go, oh my God, every time I'm standing in the sun, I think about being at the altar. Couples, you're not going to forget how you felt at the altar. And I feel like that is super important. Like, hold on to that. If you can curate that memory as much as possible, control every element you can, who's up there with you, what they're going to talk about. Because I hear horror stories of couples having family, and right, Uncle Joe got up there and told the story about how she peed on herself in the 3rd grade. Like, why are you talking about that right
Uncle
now?
Joe? Why?
Why? But like that moment cannot be redone. It cannot be redone. So hold on to as much of it, like make as much of it as magical as we can.
Agreed. Is there anything else that you wanted to pass on to the listener about spiritual ceremonies, LaToya?
Just to really be able to celebrate yourself and your connection to the space around you. That's really all it is. How do you and your partner connect with your friends and family? How do you connect with the world? How do you connect with the earth? What do you want to share of yourselves with all of this? I think that is the most important part. And then how are you going to go back and remember the day? Right? Because remember the experience. I tell couples all the time, at almost every session, we're going to sit here and write a beautiful ceremony. The moment you walk down the aisle, you will not remember a single word I said. It will leave you so fast. But when you go and sit down, you will remember how you felt. You will remember being emotional, comfortable, laughing. Those things will stick with you. So make sure that your ceremony is something that you want to hold on to in that way. And I think that's a part of making it a spiritual ceremony.
Gorgeous. Such a pleasure, LaToya. What have you got coming up? Where can people find you too?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Minister Toya, and spelled exactly how it sounds. Another project that I have is the Nearly Wed Summit, which is a summit with another planner friend and I. And it's essentially, we want wedding vendors to give couples the information they need, right? Because a lot of times couples aren't able to find out what it really looks like until they're already doing it. I've got to call a vendor and work with them, and then they feed me information, or I've called a million different ones and I can't figure it out, or TikTok, or, endless scrolling on Google. But Michelle and I, we both have had planning experiences where if one vendor had said something before the wedding day, just give me a little bit of advice in this process, it would have changed our entire wedding planning experience. And so we want to take all of our vendor friends and essentially give couples all of the bits and bobs of wedding planning. Just give it to them, right? And that way they can bring a little ease into the planning experience. And so that's what the Nearly Wed Summit is. It's a chance for couples to get what they need to plan a memorable day.
Is that a date specific, LaToya, or is it a on-demand program?
No, it's date specific. So we just had our first virtual that went amazingly. It was really, really cool to watch kind of unfold. We have a vendor mixer coming up, I believe June 21st. And then we have an in-person at the end of the year. And then our next virtual, I believe, will be August.
Nice. So if a couple were to follow you on Instagram, LaToya, then they could see this August virtual coming up.
Yeah. And they could also follow Instagram, the Nearly Wed Summit. So we're posting stuff and we'll be talking about this August date soon.
Thank you so much for your time, LaToya. Such a bloody pleasure.
You're welcome. I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
That about wraps it up for this episode of the Unbridely podcast. For the links and resources we mentioned, please head to the show notes. And if you love the show, please review and subscribe on the podcast platform you're on now so you don't miss out on a single episode. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, weddings are a team sport. Catch you soon.